Twin suns bled their final light across the scorched remains of Outpost Virex-7, once a proud listening post of the Solarian Union, now just bones of steel and ash, scorched clean by war and crawling with death. Smoke coiled through the shattered corridor like something alive, slithering between broken archways, over twisted girders, past the unmoving forms of soldiers who had no more breath to give. And there, at the edge of that ruin, a single figure stumbled backward, her legs trembling with exhaustion. Zaiya Thren's crimson skin glistened with sweat and blood. Her own, and that of the monsters she had just killed. Her white-silver hair, usually braided tight behind her head, now hung in matted strands across her jaw, sticky with grit and streaks of lavender from the wound under her ribs. Her rifle, battered, scorched, nearly dry on ammo, sagged in her grip. "Come on, you bastards," she growled through clenched teeth, voice raw, barely more than a whisper. "Still got rounds left. I'll take you with me." But she was lying, and they all knew it. 6 of them remained, the last of the Threxian Reaver squad that had ambushed her team hours ago. Grotesque insectoids with thick carapaces, limbs sharp enough to shear bone, and black eyes that drank the world around them without blinking. They moved closer, their claws tapping against stone, their mandibles clicking with something she recognized too well. Laughter. "She bleeds," one of them rasped in broken trade. "Keep her breathing." The red-skinned ones screamed the loudest. Zaya's back hit the cold hull of a collapsed coolant tank. Nowhere left to run, nowhere to hide. Her hands trembled as she raised the rifle again, forcing her finger to the trigger, though her vision blurred and her knees buckled beneath her. "I'm not yours," she spat, her breath hitching. "Not now. Not ever." The lead Threxian stepped forward, its segmented jaw twitching as it lifted a blade toward her chest. "Not your choice. Meet." Then the world cracked open. It sounded like the sky itself had split. A thunderclap with no storm, no warning, just force and finality. The lead Threxian's head vanished in a spray of phosphorescent green, its body crumpling in a heap of twitching limbs and gore. The others froze. Another crack. Another corpse hit the dust. Then another. Panic erupted among them. Too late. They fired wildly toward the ruins, toward the smoke, toward shadows that gave nothing back. Zaiya blinked through the blood in her eyes, trying to understand, trying to see. And then he stepped through the wreckage. Not a Threxian, not a Solarian, human. He walked like gravity bent around him, slow, sure, unshaken, clad in matte black armor with faint veins of pulsing blue running through its joints. His silhouette caught the last light of the suns like the edge of a blade. He held a weapon, kinetic, primitive, a slug thrower so ancient she'd only seen diagrams in old training modules. But in his hands it looked like a god's judgment. Another shot. Another Threxian fell. The rest tried to run. One made it 2 steps before its spine split open from the next round. Silence. Zaya's rifle remained pointed toward the stranger, her arms shaking, her vision swimming. He lowered his weapon as he approached, his voice deep and unhurried. "You can put that down," he said, "unless you plan on shooting your rescuer, which would be ungrateful." Zaiya didn't lower it. "Who the hell are you?" she rasped. "Humans aren't even authorized in this quadrant." He stopped a few paces away, shouldering his rifle, letting her see the lines of his face through the flickering lights of his helmet. "Name's Cael Vorrin. Independent recovery. Salvage. Whatever pays. he said, nodding at the corpses behind him. You're welcome, by the way. Zaiya's knees gave out. She slid down the metal tank, her rifle clattering beside her. You took them all down. Alone, she muttered, trying not to black out. Timing's everything, he said, crouching beside her, pulling a small device from his belt. Lieutenant Zaiya Thren, Solarian Union. I picked up your distress ping. It's been broadcasting for 3 standard days. How do you know my name? He tapped the scanner against her armor. Embedded ID. Pretty standard protocol. She hissed as he pressed something cool against the gash on her side. Stop flinching. This stuff's worth more than your armor. Zaiya forced herself to breathe, to stay conscious. I've had worse. I believe you, he said, his tone softer. But you're not going to impress me by dying in front of my ship. She finally looked into his face. He was older than she expected. Not old in years, but in miles. His eyes were too calm, too steady. And there was something behind them she couldn't quite name. Not cruelty, not pity. Recognition. My ship's 2 clicks west, he said. Standing. Think you can walk? Or am I carrying you? And she gritted her teeth, pushed herself upright. I can walk. He didn't argue. He waited. And when she stumbled again, he caught her without saying a word. You don't belong here, she said through clenched teeth. Why risk this? I was already here, he said. And your beacon was screaming for help. Figured it was the right thing to do. No one does the right thing anymore. Not without payment. Cael glanced at her, something flickering behind his calm mask. Maybe I'm not no one. They walked in silence after that. Or rather, he walked, and she limped. Each step a whisper closer to collapse. But she didn't fall again. Not because she was strong, but because someone was there to catch her, before she did. And she wasn't sure how she felt about that. Not yet. The sun had disappeared behind the jagged ridgelines, and the twin moons of Virali had begun their slow ascent, casting silver light across the wounded landscape. The desert wind howled low between the bones of the dead outpost, whispering secrets in a language older than war. They moved slowly, Zaiya forcing each step like a battle, jaw clenched, fists balled, determined to walk on her own 2 feet even if it killed her. Cael didn't say anything, but every few minutes his eyes flicked toward her, watching her balance, timing her stumbles. The 3rd time she fell, he caught her by the elbow, his grip gentle, but firm. This isn't sustainable, he said quietly. I'm fine, she muttered. You're not... I said I can walk. You said a lot of things back there, he interrupted. You also said you weren't gonna die, but I saw the color draining from your skin and the way your rifle was shaking. I know what that looks like. I've seen it too many times. She opened her mouth, but the words caught on something in her throat. Before she could argue again, he stepped forward and lifted her into his arms, as if she weighed nothing. Put me down, she growled. Not a chance. This is undignified. There's no one left here to witness your dignity, he replied, adjusting her weight. Besides, you can't protect anything if you bleed out in the sand. She didn't answer. Didn't struggle. Because she didn't have the strength. Because, in truth, it felt easier than fighting. The warmth of his armor radiated through her torn combat suit, the steady rhythm of his breathing a strange comfort, even as her pride screamed against the silence. You humans, she murmured after a while. You're stronger than you look. We have to be, Cael said, though if you weren't half dead, I'd guess you could break me over your knee. Maybe,
At full strength, she smirked faintly. My species evolved under high gravity. Endurance is our inheritance.
Red skin. Adapted for solar radiation exposure too? She blinked at him, surprised. You know xenophysiology? I try to learn whatever I can about whoever might shoot at me, or save me, or both. They crested a small rise, and the valley below opened into a flat plain of cracked stone. On the far side, nestled between two clusters of volcanic rock, sat his ship. It wasn't beautiful. It was armored, brutal, designed more for surviving than flying, painted in matte gray, patched with salvaged plates from at least 3 other crafts. It looked like it had clawed its way out of a dozen bad situations and didn't plan on dying in the next one. She didn't speak, but her body tensed slightly in his arms. He noticed. What? There, she said, pointing with a weak hand. He followed her gaze, and his jaw tightened. 6 Threxian raiders, circling the exterior of the ship like carrion birds, their claws scraping across the hull, trying to breach the side panel. They must have followed my beacon too, she whispered. He moved quickly, ducking behind a boulder near the edge of the ridge, setting her down carefully. Stay here, he said. How many? 6? Maybe 7, he replied, unslinging his rifle. I need to get to the defense panel on the starboard side. Can you give me covering fire? She raised an eyebrow. I was hitting targets at 400 meters while you were still figuring out how to spell your name. He chuckled once, pulled a compact pistol from his belt and handed it to her. Impress me. Then he was gone. She steadied herself against the rock, sighted in, lined her shot, and breathed. The first bolt took one of the raiders in the thorax. The second scattered the group just enough for Cael to sprint through the open ground without drawing fire. He moved like he belonged there, part of the dirt and smoke, silent and lethal. Zaiya watched him reach the panel, his fingers a blur over the keypad. A second later, the ship roared to life. Twin turrets emerged from hidden compartments beneath the hull, rotating with quiet menace before lighting up the desert with blinding blue flashes. 2 of the raiders went down instantly. The rest turned and ran. Zaiya exhaled, long and slow, as her pistol lowered. Cael waved her forward, and she limped toward him, her pride barely keeping up with her legs. Nice defense grid, she muttered. Custom, he replied. Cost me more than the ship itself. He ran a hand along the hull, then stopped, frowning. What? They hit the propulsion manifold, he said, voice tight. It's damaged. We're grounded, at least for a day or 2. She swallowed, the frustration rising in her throat. How bad? Bad enough. He keyed in another code, and the boarding ramp descended with a mechanical hiss. Let's get inside. I'll patch you up before I touch the engines. She followed him up the ramp, every step aching, but lighter than before. Inside, the ship was not what she expected. It was warm, not in temperature, but in spirit. The lights were low, amber-toned, soft. The walls were lined with books, actual printed books, and strange objects from a dozen different cultures. Trinkets, charms, small things collected on long journeys. There were even plants, real ones, housed in hydro containers bolted into the walls. This doesn't feel like a mercenary's den, she said, brushing a hand across the spine of a leather-bound journal. I'm not a mercenary, he replied, disappearing into another room. Contractor. Scavenger. Maybe. But not that. He returned with a full med kit, motioning to a couch-like bench near the galley. Sit. Armor off. She hesitated, but the room was quiet, and he didn't press, didn't leer.
so she pulled down the top of her suit, revealing the compression layer beneath and the blood-soaked wounds across her collarbone and side. He knelt without a word, opening a series of small compartments, laying out tools, gels, patches. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, but they trembled slightly as he touched her skin. "Your technique is impressive," she said softly, watching him work. "You pick it up, if you don't want to die out here," he replied. There was silence between them as he treated her injuries. Not awkward, just full, like air charged with static. She studied him, the lines of his face, the scar above his right eyebrow, the faint calluses on his fingertips. "You never answered my question," she said finally. "Which one?" "Why you helped me." He paused, just for a moment, and looked her in the eye. "Because it was right." She searched his face for sarcasm, for irony, for some hidden motive, but found none. Just a quiet certainty. "People don't just do the right thing anymore," she whispered. "I'm not people," he said. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, she believed that. She believed it completely. The hum of the ship's environmental system whispered through the walls like a lullaby, warm air circulating through the narrow corridors. Faint lights glowing above as artificial night settled into the metal bones of the vessel. Zaiya sat in silence on the bench seat, wrapped in a faded thermal blanket, her armor set aside, her wounds freshly sealed beneath layers of regenerative gel. Cael moved through the space with quiet purpose, not like someone performing a task, but like someone who had done it 100 times before, his hands steady, his breath calm. The war outside felt like it had been paused or pushed into another universe altogether. Zaiya's eyes roamed the interior again, past the recessed shelves, the stack of physical books, the curious blend of scavenged culture and deliberate comfort. It wasn't a warship. It wasn't a merc ship either. It was a home. The kind built by someone who didn't expect to stay anywhere long, but wanted every place to feel less empty. "You live like someone who doesn't expect to die," as she murmured. Cael glanced at her from across the room, his hands busy setting down a small pot of boiling water into a heat-retaining cradle. "I live like someone who expects to be remembered." She let that hang for a moment. "Your species is strange," she added. "You leave things behind, tokens, stories, even when you know you might not survive." "It's how we deal with fear," he said, "by pretending there's always more to come, even if we don't get to see it." He walked back toward her, holding out a battered metal cup filled with something that steamed gently. The smell was unfamiliar, earthy, a hint of spice and smoke. "What is it?" she asked cautiously. "Revel bark tea, a blend I picked up from some colony doctors on Glenth. It's good for circulation, pain, and if you're lucky, clarity." Zaiya took the cup, sipped carefully, and nearly choked. "That's vile," Cael chuckled. "I didn't say it tasted good, just that it worked." They sat like that for a while, the silence between them no longer tense, no longer fragile, just comfortable. The quiet that comes after the world ends, when nothing is expected, and everything is possible. Zaiya tilted her head slightly, studying him again. "You're not union, not corporate. You don't answer to anyone, so what the hell are you doing in Threx-controlled space?" Cael leaned back in his seat, stretching one arm across the cushion behind him, his expression unreadable. "You want the honest version, or the one that makes me sound noble?" "Start with honest," she said. "I don't believe in noble." He let out a long breath. "I was already on Virili when your beacon went live," he admitted.
I wasn't here by accident. I was tracking something, a Threxian named Korith Krell, warlord, butcher, and lately, scavenger of old tech. Zaiya sat up straighter, her grip tightening on the cup. Krell's name showed up in Union reports 6 cycles ago. He's been raiding deep outposts, but his attacks have shifted, more targeted. He's looking for something. Cael nodded slowly. Not something. Someone, or rather, someone's legacy. She stared at him. You think he's after progenitor tech? Cael's gaze sharpened. I know he is. Her blood ran cold. My mission, she said slowly, was a recon sweep, but the sensor data wasn't normal. The readings, they matched old progenitor energy patterns. Command sent me to investigate, quietly. He's looking too, Cael said, and he's not far behind. They sat in silence, both realizing at the same moment that their collision wasn't coincidence, wasn't fate. It was convergence. The sound of static crackled through the console, drawing Cael's attention. He stood, crossed to the wall panel, tapped a few keys. A map projected into the space between them, flickering with weak signal points. Signal spikes match progenitor artifact pulses, Cael said, pointing to a highlighted ridge east of their current position. About 5 kilometers through rough terrain, buried in the ruins of what used to be a Solarian research station. Zaiya's expression tightened. That station was decommissioned over a decade ago, sealed and abandoned after a containment breach. The site was never officially cleared. Cael shut the projection down, eyes locked on hers. Krell's coming for it, and we've got maybe 1 night's lead. 2, if he underestimates the terrain. Zaiya didn't hesitate. I'm going with you. Cael raised an eyebrow. You can barely stand. I'll stand when I need to, she said, and shoot when I don't. He didn't argue, just nodded, then reached down to hand her another med patch. Then you'd better rest while you can. We move at first light. She took the patch, pressed it to her skin, and leaned back into the bench as the numbing agents did their work. Her eyes were half-lidded now, her body sinking into something close to rest, but her mind stayed sharp. You know what happens if he gets his hands on that tech, don't you? I do, Cael said softly. That's why I can't let him. And she watched him for a long moment, then closed her eyes and dreamed of red sand and twin suns. The morning didn't come with light, not in the way Zaiya remembered it from her home world. Virilized dawn crept in through sulfur-stained skies, a muted red glow that crawled slowly across the broken horizon like something wounded, unwilling to rise. She stood at the open ramp of Cael's ship, dressed again in armor, what was left of it, the plates scorched, the joints creaking where field repairs had fused them back together. Her side still ached, but the pain had dulled to something distant, manageable. Inside the ship, Cael was finishing the last of the diagnostic checks, calibrating the remaining systems to standby mode. They wouldn't need the engines. Not yet. You ready? He asked without turning. As I'll ever be, she replied, eyes still fixed on the landscape before them. The ruins in the east were still miles away, visible only as jagged silhouettes against the rising heat, fractured towers from another era, half buried in sand and time. Cael joined her at the ramp, his rifle strapped across his back, his armor sealed. He didn't speak for a moment, just stood beside her, watching the same horizon. You ever been to a progenitor site before? He asked. No, she said. Most of them are sealed, classified, protected by treaties the Union barely enforces anymore. They scare people, he murmured. Things that shouldn't exist. Technologies that still operate long after their creators disappeared. You think they disappeared? She asked, not because she was curious, but because she wanted to know what he believed. I think, he said slowly, they found something on the edge of understanding and became part of it, and whatever they left behind wasn't meant for us. She nodded once, then stepped down into the dirt. The journey was harder than it should have been. Her legs stiffened halfway through the first kilometer, and her breathing grew shallow with each incline. But she refused to stop, refused to slow down. Cael didn't try to carry her again. He stayed just close enough to catch her if she collapsed. But she didn't. They spoke little. The landscape didn't allow for it. The deeper they moved into the eastern ravines, the more unnatural the terrain became. The stone was scored in perfect arcs, like something had melted it from above, or reshaped it from below. Plants grew in places they shouldn't, tall spines of glass-veined thorns that hummed faintly when brushed, like they were responding to movement. Zaiya paused once, her gloved fingers grazing one of the vines, and she pulled back quickly. "It's warm," she whispered. "Alive?" Some of the progenitor tech was organic. "Or something close," Cael said, "blurring the line between machine and biology." "And what we're walking into?" He didn't answer, because they were already there. The ruins loomed ahead like the skeleton of a leviathan, shattered arches of black stone rising from the dust, carved with symbols that pulsed faintly when seen from the corner of the eye. The entrance was half buried, an old blast door torn open decades ago, the scorch mark still black against the alloy. Zaiya's hand went instinctively to her weapon, her muscles tightening, her breath caught. "You okay?" Cael asked. "Something's wrong," she whispered. "The air, it's too still." They stepped inside. The temperature dropped instantly, the light shifting from the reddish glow of dawn to something colder, bluer, as if the walls themselves filtered the spectrum. The corridors were strangely preserved. No sand, no rot, just dust, ancient and undisturbed, until now. They moved carefully, Cael taking the lead, his rifle raised, his eyes scanning every arch and shadow, Zaiya close behind, her scanner in hand, tracking faint energy pulses that grew stronger with every step. Symbols lined the walls, some etched, others burned directly into the structure, none of them in any language she knew, but some of them stirred recognition in the part of her mind that dreamed in geometry. "What do they mean?" Cael asked. She stopped at one, her fingers tracing the curve of an unfamiliar sigil. "I think warnings. Maybe instructions, but it's not linear. It's not meant to be read like a sentence. It's meant to be felt." "That's unsettling." "Welcome to Progenitor Tech," she said. They passed through an atrium that had collapsed long ago, light streaming down through shattered glass and twisted girders, the dust motes hanging in the air like frozen sparks. And then they saw it. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal of polished obsidian-like material, but it absorbed light instead of reflecting it, drawing everything inward, upon it. Resting in eerie stillness was the artifact. It was no larger than Cael's hand, a sphere of rotating rings, orbiting a softly pulsing core of pale blue light. It made no sound, but the air around it shimmered faintly, like it was bending space. Zaiya stepped forward instinctively, her scanner lighting up with a chorus of alarms. "That's it," she whispered. "That's what Krell's looking for." Cael circled slowly, eyes never leaving the artifact. "Any idea what it does?" "No, but if it's active, it's dangerous." Cael reached for it. "Wait," she said sharply. But his fingers had already brushed the outer ring. The world shifted, the light flared, the rings accelerated, and Cael staggered backward, eyes wide, his body going rigid for a second, like something had moved through him, into him. Cael. He raised a hand, palm open. I'm okay, he said, his voice tight. It's talking to me, not in words, just impressions, thoughts. Zaiya stepped closer, uncertain whether to pull him back or let it happen. It's scanning me, he continued. My mind, my genetics, memories, everything. It's adapting. Her heart raced. That shouldn't be possible. Humans weren't even spacefaring when the progenitors vanished. It shouldn't recognize you. Maybe it doesn't care, he said. Or maybe it was waiting. She didn't know how long the connection lasted. Seconds. Minutes. But when it ended, Cael pulled back slowly, blinking, as if waking from something deep. It chose me, he said quietly. And that was when the explosion came. A low rumble at first, then a shock wave that tore through the chamber like a scream. Dust fell in thick clouds from the ceiling, lights flickered, and from deep down the corridor came the unmistakable sound of movement. Threx, Cael said grimly. He's here. Krell found us. Zaiya reached for her rifle, her jaw set. How many? No idea, but we don't have much time. Cael pulled the artifact from its pedestal, the light dimming slightly as it touched his skin, and tucked it into a containment satchel at his side. As they ran back toward the surface, the halls began to tremble. From behind them, the roar of alien voices echoed, and the pounding of clawed feet on stone told them exactly how close death was. But neither of them looked back, because the thing they carried was older than the war, older than the stars, and it had already chosen its host. The ruins shuddered again, not from tectonics, but from movement, deliberate, heavy. The sounds of weapons fire echoed faintly through the underground corridors, distant, but closing. Cael adjusted the containment satchel strapped across his chest, the artifact within pulsing dimly through the fabric, like a heartbeat that wasn't his, like it was alive, aware, watching. Zaiya moved beside him, her breathing controlled, weapon raised, the faint blue glow of her scanner illuminating a branching corridor ahead. There's a secondary path this way, she whispered. Might take us around the collapsed section near the atrium. Might, Cael repeated. And if it doesn't? Then we make another path. They didn't hesitate, didn't look back. There was no time for fear, no space for second thoughts. They moved in silence, the air growing colder with each step, the walls narrowing, sloping downward. Symbols etched into the surface here were different, more elaborate, glowing faintly as they passed, like they recognized them, or remembered. Zaiya slowed near one of the panels, her fingers brushing across a spiral of lines that shimmered under her touch. They're not warnings anymore, she said quietly. These are instructions, something about resonance, communion, mental attunement. Cael looked at her. You're reading this? Not exactly. It's like I know what it means without knowing how I know. Like the language is bypassing logic, speaking straight to instinct. Which is exactly what worries me, he muttered. The corridor opened abruptly into a vast chamber. Perfectly round, the ceiling arching high above them like a dome carved into the planet's heart. It glowed with reflected light from some unseen source, soft, blue-white, casting dancing shadows across the floor. In the center stood what could only be called a throne, but not one meant to be sat upon. It was a construct of hovering rings, rotating slowly around an empty core, suspended above a platform that vibrated faintly with energy. Zaiya stepped forward, breath catching. This isn't just a storage vault. This is an interface, a control node. The artifact wasn't meant to be kept here. It was meant to be used here. Used how? She turned to him, her expression unreadable. If the progenitors left anything behind, it wasn't machines. It was memory, consciousness, stored in forms we can barely understand. That artifact. It's not just a weapon or a key. It's a conduit. It links to something larger, maybe even planetary. Cael took a slow breath. And now it's bonded to me. She nodded once, and then everything went quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a predator. Then, the chamber trembled with a deep, guttural voice, warped through a translator unit but unmistakably Threxian. So, it chose you. Cael turned slowly. Zaiya already moving to flank him, rifle raised, steady. A figure emerged from the shadows of a higher walkway, larger than the others, draped in pieces of armor fused with cybernetic limbs, glowing tubes of green fluid running along its spine. Cael. The warlord moved with a disturbing grace for something so heavily modified, each step measured, every movement efficient, deliberate. His mandibles twitched, and the voice came again, cold, amused. I must admit, I didn't expect it to accept your species. But perhaps the artifact is more desperate than discerning. Back off, Cael said, stepping forward, his stance wide, protective. You can't control it. Krell's compound eyes narrowed. I don't need to control it, he hissed. I need only remove you from the equation. The device will rebind itself once its current host is dead. At his signal, raiders appeared from every direction, a dozen or more, emerging from cracks in the stone, descending from the upper walkways, armed, armored, ready. Zaiya pulled close to Cael, her back nearly touching his. There are too many, she whispered. I know. Can you use the artifact? I can try, but it takes something from me every time I do. It drains energy, life. He looked at her, and in that second, his eyes were calm, the kind of calm that came before choosing something irreversible. No, she said instantly. We'll fight our way out. There's another way. There has to be. But he didn't answer, because the raiders opened fire. Zaiya moved like a ghost, each shot from her rifle dropping a target with clinical precision. Cael raised his hand, and the air itself shimmered with power. A kinetic pulse erupted from his palm, slamming 3 raiders into the far wall, their bodies collapsing under the impact. But it cost him. He staggered, gasping, the blue glow under his skin flickering. The artifact was eating him alive. I can end this, he whispered, but I'll need more power. I'll need to open the link fully. It'll kill you, Zaiya shouted over the roar of plasma fire. You don't know what it'll do to your mind, your body. Maybe, he said, but it'll keep you alive, and keep that thing from Cael. She looked into his eyes, and saw the end already written there. Before she could stop him, he placed his hand over the satchel, and pressed. The artifact surged through him, not around him, through. Light exploded from his chest, flooding the chamber with a brilliance so intense it turned shadows into ghosts. The rings of the hovering throne aligned, spinning in sync with the pulse inside him. The air thickened, vibrating. The raiders screamed, weapons dropping from hands that no longer obeyed. Cael took one step forward, then froze as Cael rose into the air, eyes burning with otherworldly fire. voice layered with tones that didn't belong to a single species. Enough. The words struck like a shockwave, flattening every Threxian to the ground, their limbs convulsing under invisible pressure. Zaiya shielded her eyes, shouting his name, but the sound didn't reach him. He hovered for a moment longer, then released the power in a single wave. It wasn't violent. It was surgical. Every hostile presence in the chamber collapsed unconscious, or dead. Their systems disabled, their implants fried. The artifact dimmed, and Cael dropped like a stone. Zaiya ran, catching him before he hit the floor completely, his body trembling, the glow in his veins fading to nothing. His eyes fluttered open, barely conscious. "Did it work?" he whispered. She pressed her forehead to his, her breath shaking. "You idiot. You beautiful, reckless idiot. You nearly burned yourself out." "Had to try," he murmured. "You're not alone anymore, remember?" And then he went still. Not dead, but unconscious. His body slack. Too much taken. Too much given. Zaiya looked around the chamber, the silence now heavy with what had been cost. And then she looked down at him, at the man who had walked into a war zone for a stranger and become something the universe hadn't seen in 1,000 years. The chamber had gone silent, but it wasn't the silence of safety. It was the kind that followed collapse, aftermath, the kind of silence that made breath feel too loud. Zaiya knelt beside Cael's unconscious body, her hands trembling as she pressed 2 fingers to his neck, pulse slow, fading, but still there. The blue glow that had flooded his veins was now gone, leaving only faint residual lines like the afterimage of lightning across skin. The artifact, once pulsing and alive, now lay dormant against his chest, its rings unmoving, as if it had gone to sleep, or withdrawn, or consumed everything it had been given. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She moved. Her hands worked fast, retrieving the emergency medkit from her belt, tearing open injector pods with her teeth, applying stabilizers and fluid patches to his exposed side. She didn't know if it would be enough, not after what he'd done, but she knew doing nothing wasn't an option. "You said not to let anything happen to you," she whispered, her voice raw. "You don't get to break that promise now." She secured his head gently, removing the satchel with the artifact and placing it to the side, wrapping him in the thermal foil from her pack, and trying to keep his body temperature from crashing. Around them, the room flickered with residual energy, soft waves rippling outward from where he had stood, everything tinged with static and memory, even the progenitor structure. Once silent, now thrummed faintly, as if acknowledging something, or mourning. Footsteps echoed from the shadows. Deliberate, slow, armored. Zaiya stood, raising her rifle, but it wasn't Cael. It was one of the Threxians, barely moving, dragging its body along the floor with one broken arm, its mechanical augments sparking with every twitch. She stepped toward it, eyes narrowed, muzzle aimed between its eyes. The Threxian didn't raise a weapon. It looked at her, eyes glinting with something almost like fear. "He was not supposed to survive the interface," the creature rasped, voice glitching through its translator. "No one has before." "He didn't survive it," Zaiya said coldly. "He endured it. There's a difference." The Threxian hissed weakly, then went still, its systems failing, breathing ceasing, its body sagging into the stone like a discarded shell. Zaiya didn't look at it again. She turned back to Cael, lifted him with effort. his weight heavier now without strength in his limbs, and began dragging him toward the exit. Every step hurt. Every breath scraped her lungs, but she didn't stop. It took half an hour to reach the surface, maybe longer. She didn't keep track. Time had stopped having meaning the moment Cael fell. By the time they breached the outer edge of the ruins, the light had changed again. The twin suns were lower now, casting long shadows across the valley. The ship shimmered in the distance, a haven that felt a lifetime away. She activated the beacon on her wrist, sending a signal to the ship's autonav. The system responded with a chirp, confirming remote control override. A low hum filled the air as the ship began its slow descent toward their position, skimming low across the sand, kicking up dust trails behind its stabilizers. When it landed, the ramp dropped automatically. Zaiya hauled Cael aboard, laying him in the med bay, activating every automated process she could: nutrient IV, neural stabilization, regenerative field. The ship did its work, and she stood back, watching, unable to do anything more. Not yet. She walked to the cockpit, collapsed into the pilot chair, and let her forehead rest against the console. Only then did she let herself breathe again. But not for long, because something still gnawed at the back of her mind. Not fear, not grief, purpose. She retrieved the artifact from the satchel, holding it in her hand. Cold now, but not dead. She could feel it. A thrum, buried deep. A sense that it was waiting. She stared at it. "Why him?" she whispered. No answer. Only silence. She didn't expect more. Not yet. Later, when the ship was in low orbit, and Cael was still unconscious but stable, she sat beside him, watching the monitors, listening to the rhythm of his vitals, the slow beep of the scanner that told her he was still here, still fighting. She touched his hand, and this time, he responded. His fingers curled weakly around hers. His eyes fluttered, then opened just a crack. "Hey," she said softly, leaning forward. He blinked, his voice barely a breath. "Did we win?" She smiled, despite the burn behind her eyes. "We survived. That's a kind of winning." He tried to move, winced, gave up. "Never doing that again." "I'd prefer if you didn't," she said. "But for the record, it worked. Krell's forces are gone. The interface is locked, and the artifact, whatever it is, doesn't want anyone else." He didn't respond immediately, just looked at her. "You stayed." "Of course I did." "You could have left me there." "I could have," she said. "But then I wouldn't have gotten the satisfaction of saying I told you so." He laughed once and winced again. "Don't make me do that. It hurts." "Then rest," she said, her voice gentler now. "You've done enough." He closed his eyes again, hand still in hers. And this time, when he slept, it was deeper, peaceful, like something had finally released its grip. She watched him, and for the first time since she met him, she allowed herself to wonder what came next. Not just the mission, not just the artifact, but them. Because even though he was human, even though their paths should have crossed for only a moment, they hadn't just survived. They'd been changed. And neither of them would ever be the same again. The stars hung motionless beyond the ship's viewport, suspended in the vacuum like ancient gods staring through a veil of glass. The vessel drifted quietly in high orbit above Virili, its engines silent, its systems running on low power, lights dimmed, as if honoring something sacred. Zaiya sat alone in the cockpit, her legs drawn up, arms wrapped loosely around her knees. Her gaze had not moved in hours, fixed on the swirl of nebulae in the far distance, violet and gold spiraling like the remnants of forgotten battles. Behind her, Cael slept in the medbay, his vitals stable now. The bruising along his ribs faded, the lines of exhaustion on his face softened by the healing field, but his breathing still carried that edge of fragility, like a man who had not quite returned from wherever he'd gone. And the artifact remained sealed in the containment chamber, silent, unmoving, but never really still. Zaiya had tried to rest, but sleep refused her. Every time her eyes closed, she saw the ring spinning inside his chest, the glow in his eyes, the way the room had bent around his voice. He had become something in that moment, something the galaxy hadn't seen in thousands of cycles. Not a weapon, not even a host. A bridge. The progenitor interface wasn't just tech, it was consciousness, memory, design beyond intention. And for one impossible heartbeat, Cael Vorrin had spoken with it, and it had answered. She rose at last, her joints stiff, her body moving like it no longer trusted the floor beneath her, and made her way down the corridor toward the containment bay. The door hissed open at her approach, the chamber inside dim, lit only by the low pulsing light of the artifact inside its suspended field. It hovered in silence, rings locked in place, core dim, but still alive. She stepped closer. Her reflection caught faintly in the curved surface of the force field. Her red skin shadowed, silver hair unbound. Her face looked different, older, or maybe just changed. "What are you really?" she whispered. "And what do you want from him?" There was no sound, but something shifted. Not in the room, not in the air, in her. A sensation like gravity bending sideways, like thought becoming weight. A pulse that vibrated through her chest without touching her body. Images flashed across her vision. Not seen. Felt. Endless cities suspended in clouds. Creatures without faces. Singing in tones she couldn't hear. A planet splitting open. Light pouring out of the cracks. Hands. Thousands of hands reaching into stars and pulling something back. Then Cael, standing in the chamber again, glowing, not with power, but with clarity. And her, standing opposite him, holding something that could never be described, a choice. Then it all vanished. Zaiya staggered back, her hands gripping the wall, her heart pounding, her vision blurred with afterlight. The artifact floated, unchanged. But she understood something now. It hadn't chosen him for what he was. It had chosen him for what he could become. She left the chamber without another word, sealing the door behind her. When she returned to the medbay, Cael was awake, barely. But his eyes were open, and clearer than before. "Zaiya," he murmured. She crossed to his side, knelt beside the cot. "I'm here." He tried to sit, failed, settled for turning his head toward her. "How long was I out?" "2 rotations," she said softly. "Your system needed time. The artifact. It burned through everything you had." "I remember," he whispered. Light. Voices. Something massive, like standing in the middle of a thought too big to hold. "You interfaced with a progenitor construct and survived," she said. "That shouldn't be possible. Not without genetic keys or ancient bloodlines." He gave her a faint smile. "Maybe I'm special." She didn't smile back. "It's not funny." He let the silence stretch between them, then looked at her more seriously. "You saw something. Didn't you? She nodded. I touched the chamber. While you were asleep, the artifact. It showed me something. Not a message, more like a direction. Toward what? She hesitated. An origin point, I think. A source node. Something deeper than what we found. Hidden, beneath all this. A place the artifact wants to go, and it's pulling you with it. He closed his eyes, exhaled. So, we're not done. No, she said. We're just getting started. She rose, walked to the console, activated the star map. It flared to life across the wall, constellations spinning, coordinates pinged by long-dead satellites. She entered the data manually, aligning with the trace signal encoded in the artifact's last energy surge. A small system appeared, off the charts, no name, no colony markers, just a red dot inside a swirling debris field. That's where it's pointing, she said. You ready for this? Cael pushed himself upright with effort, sweat breaking along his brow, pain written across his face, but his voice steady. If you're going, I'm going. She turned back to him. Her eyes didn't burn anymore, but something deeper had taken root there, something quiet and unshakable. You're not just part of this anymore, she said. You are the key, whether we like it or not. He held her gaze and didn't flinch. Then let's finish what we started. She activated the ship's nav system. The engines roared to life beneath their feet, steady, familiar, full of new weight. As they lifted from orbit, the stars ahead seemed to shift, and for the first time in her life, Zaiya Thren didn't fear what came next, because the man beside her had walked through something impossible and emerged still human, but more than human. Something the galaxy hadn't seen since the stars first learned to speak. The ship tore through hyperspace like a whisper through glass, silent but relentless. Streams of starlight curved outside the viewports, bending around them, streaking past in impossible geometries, like time was being folded back on itself. Cael stood in the observation deck, one hand resting against the glass, eyes watching the shimmer of velocity beyond the stars. He no longer felt fear in the way he once had. Not after the chamber. Not after the artifact had poured its memory into him like molten steel through bone. He still felt human, but just barely. The lights in the ship dimmed for sleep cycle, but no one slept. Zaiya sat in the engine corridor, tools scattered around her, not because she was repairing anything, but because it gave her hands something to do, something that didn't involve thinking about what they were flying toward. The red dot on the map had no name, no broadcast, no orbital satellite ping. It didn't even exist in any Union registry, just a dead system wrapped in silence and forgotten stone. And yet, the signal from the artifact pulled like gravity. 4 hours out, Cael said, appearing in the doorway behind her. She looked up, wiping a smear of oil across her wrist. You ready? I don't think I'll ever be ready, he replied, but I'm not backing out. She nodded, closed the panel, stood. Her eyes lingered on his, and for the first time, she didn't see the man who'd saved her. She saw the man who might save something far bigger. They met again in the cockpit as the ship dropped from hyperspace, the sound like the sigh of an ancient god releasing its breath. Before them, the system unfolded. A dying star, cracked along its corona like an egg broken from the inside, spewing controlled flares that looped in perfect arcs toward orbiting satellites. Except they weren't satellites. They were fragments of architecture. Progenitor scale, massive rings slowly turning around the star, half ruined, half active, as if the war that had ended them had never quite finished. At the system's edge, hung a single world, dark, cold, lifeless, but pulsing faintly with the same blue resonance as the artifact. Cael leaned closer to the controls, zooming in, filtering the scans. There's a structure on the planet's surface, buried under kilometers of ice and volcanic ash, but the signal's coming from there. Zaiya checked the readings, frowning. No atmosphere, but gravity's stable, tectonics low, temperature lethal but manageable with sealed armor. He looked at her. Suit up. The drop was silent. They landed on the edge of a ravine carved into the surface like a wound, the stone black and brittle, like burned glass. Wind howled across the ridges, carrying no sound but pressure. They moved together, slowly, each step echoing against the frozen earth, lights on their shoulders cutting through the endless dark. Then, they found it. A door, buried in obsidian. The same rings as the artifact etched across its face. The second Cael stepped forward. The symbols ignited, lines of light racing outward, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The door opened without a sound. Inside was warmth, not temperature. Something deeper, a hum that resonated in their teeth, in their bones, in the place behind their eyes. They walked through ancient halls of impossible scale, walls that pulsed with memory, data streams encoded in crystal veins running along the floors, silent sentinels lining either side, humanoid shapes without features, unmoving, timeless. And then they reached it. The core, a chamber so vast it swallowed their lights. Its walls curved like the inside of a planet, and at its center, suspended above a pit of light, hung a second artifact. But this one was massive, dozens of meters wide, and pulsing with recognition. Cael stepped forward, and the smaller artifact in his possession ignited, its rings spinning wildly, syncing with the construct above. Zaiya's breath caught in her throat. "It's calling to you." He nodded, slowly. "I can feel it. It's not just knowledge. It's invitation." "Do you trust it?" she asked. He looked at her, his eyes glowing faintly, that blue light returning, but softer now. "I don't know if I trust it, but I know it trusts me." He stepped into the circle of light. The world shifted. Zaiya saw him rise, not physically, but through layers of memory, his body surrounded by waves of energy, his mind expanding into shapes that had no name. She saw flashes of stars being born, galaxies mapped in thought, languages that sang in color. She took a step forward, and in that moment, she saw herself through his eyes, not just as a soldier, but as a witness, a balance, a tether. Cael reached into the core, and the moment his hand touched the central ring, everything froze. The sentinels surrounding the chamber lit with life, their heads turning slowly, eyes glowing. The walls began to shift, not collapse, transform, data flowing into the air, forming holographic fields, constellations, history, future. The artifact spoke, not in sound, but through him. He turned, slowly, eyes shining with stars. They left this behind not as a weapon, but as a seed, a way to return, when we were ready to listen. Zaiya took a step closer. "Return to what?" "To each other," he said softly. "To memory, to meaning, to the place where thought began." And then, silence. The energy receded. The light dimmed, and Cael staggered forward, his body racked with exhaustion. Zaiya caught him, held him upright. "It's done," he whispered. "No," she said, her voice quiet. "It's just beginning." Because as they turned, the sentinels moved, not with threat, but with purpose. One of them approached, extending a hand, and in that moment, Zaiya understood. The artifact hadn't just chosen Cael to carry knowledge. It had chosen him to awaken something long dormant. Hope. The kind that wasn't born in empires, but in people. The kind that couldn't be programmed, only earned. Together. They walked back toward the surface, leaving behind a chamber still glowing, still breathing. Outside, the stars waited, and the galaxy, for the first time in 1,000 years, began to stir.